Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's investor webinar. I'm Wei from Homodeus Research, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Williamson, Managing Director of Alpha HPA, or Alpha for short. Alpha has a market cap of about 1 billion, and the ticker is A4N. Now, before handing it over to you, Rob, I wanted to highlight why, to me, Alpha is an interesting story at this point. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah.
A few key points. Firstly, it's a less obvious play on AI. Everyone talks about the picks and shovels, and we go into data centers, but I think semis or semiconductors are less prominent in the Aussie market. One interesting thing to note is that Alpha did sign two major Japanese semiconductor customers. Well, they upgraded their supply commitment this quarter, and one of them tripled it to 360 tons a year. Secondly, the company is fully funded and it's building. They just closed a $225 million cap raise earlier this year, and that was backed by some big hitters, including the National Reconstruction Fund, AusSuper and Orica. And so they're sitting at over $200 million worth of cash at this point in time. And then the third one is that I don't think that they're a one-trick pony. So beyond chips, they are selling into sapphire optics, PFAS water filtration, batteries, and pharma. They've got 78 orders from 29 customers this quarter alone. All right, I hope that provides some context on why this is such an exciting story to me. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Wei, and thanks for your time, everybody. Great. So, Alpha is we are also a critical minerals business, I guess, and we would be the only critical mineral, I guess, in the sort of critical minerals list, if you will, in Australia it's a manufactured material. It's not actually something we dig out of the ground ourselves. We're not a mining business. And I think the best way to think about our products is that they are performance materials that are priced on their performance. It's not about a payable on the aluminium content or any other metal content. It's purely this material does something great for me as a customer, and so I will pay what I see its value in it. And so where that generally lands for us at the moment is around about $29 to $30 a kilogram for our materials, and our cash cost is sort of around about $7 a kilo. But getting into the detail though, what we actually have is a really unique technology. It's been developed here in Australia. It's sort of deploying a fair amount of sort of Australian expertise in hydrometallurgical minerals processing type of technology, but we've pivoted that into our ability to make this very, very high purity alumina and other sort of aluminium type products that, as I say, go into those high performing applications that you mentioned earlier, Wade. We have a sort of comprehensive support from the government, both in terms of some debt from NAIF and EFA via the Critical Minerals Fund. And we have this, as I say, this really incredible technology. We're the only company in the world, to our knowledge at least, that has successfully deployed solvent extraction technology for purification of aluminium. Solvent extraction, for those that are keeping notes, is actually a very common technology for metals refining more broadly. It's been used in copper, for example, since the 70s. Probably 40 or 50% of the world's copper, I think, comes from the ASX process. My personal background in ASX is from a zinc ASX plant that I started up in the United States. And of course, it's widely used in the refinement of rare earths and other things like that. So it's not anything that we've invented from a mechanical new technology point of view. It's all a kind of a chemical IP, which we protect through a sort of a trade secret approach, which is like how Coca-Cola has protected the recipe for Coke. So we are running or developing the project in two stages. Stage one, which you can see here, is in operation, and that was fully funded by shareholders. That's sort of probably all in so far. We've put about $110 million into this of equity, and it's producing all of our products, which we use for technical qualification, and is now actually in those materials are in the supply chain for the semi markets that we'll get into a little bit later. And then stage two is what's sort of under construction right now. And so as you can see, we're well into it. We've got as of sort of June 30, roughly speaking, we're sort of around about $260 million capital deployed of a $700 million project here. This big section here on the bottom right is the solvent extraction technology that I was referring to earlier. We do have the same sort of equipment inside this building, but as you can see, it's a hell of a lot smaller. In fact, the entire facility in stage one is barely the size of just the SX plant for stage two. Stage two will be a 10,000 ton type of facility. I'll call out Orica and Rio Tinto here in these images. And so you can see here that this is what will actually be finished when it's done. And the connection here to Orica is pretty important. Orica is a 5% shareholder, as you mentioned, Wade. They've been on the register since 2023, I think it was. And they're about there, as I say, they've maintained their position on the register at 5%. Actually, it was 2022, I should say, late 2022. And they provide the reagents to us, which is nitric acid and ammonia. And then we give them back a semi-finished ammonium nitrate product, which they then convert into their various AN products on their facility. Then Rio Tinto, we call them out because they're the sort of source of the aluminium units that comes into the facility here. And we use that material. It's a sort of intermediate material that comes out of the aluminium refinery, the alumina refinery. And that material is sort of nominally about $400 a ton. And of course, when we finish with it, it gets converted into material that is, $25,000 or $30,000 a ton. So sorry, there's just something that's come up on my screen for some bizarre reason, and we're just getting rid of it. So that's sort of the layout. So all of our kind of key ingredients that we need for the most part are within a 2-kilometre radius of the facility. This is in Gladstone in Queensland. And so we're well poised to take advantage of that kind of circular economy, as some people like to call it. This is a little bit of a deep dive into the process. I won't spend too much time on this, but I think the key thing here is that our technology largely sits in two places. One is the solvent extraction technology, and you can see the kind of Orica upcycling here that happens with the nitric acid ammonia coming in and then the AN going back. And then that produces a very, very pure aluminium nitrate crystal, which is a product in its own right, as you can see here. But that product is also something that is a precursor to make all of our other products that you can see that around this flow sheet. We have two production lines. And by lines, I mean they're two slightly different chemical processes to get to what at a chemical level is kind of the same thing, but the crystal morphology of the material, so the particle shape and description is different. And so it provides different performance characteristics for our customer. The one here, this HPA precursor precept, is some pretty critical IP as well. That produces a really unique particle that outperforms other aluminas in what's called CMP polishing for semiconductors. And I can talk a little bit about that later. And then this process down here, the ATH precipitation route, which gives us an ATH or an aluminium hydroxide, but also these other aluminas here, gamma or GAPX, gamma alumina powder, alpha alumina powder. Alpha and gamma are just different phases of aluminas. These materials are proving to be extremely popular in what's called thermal fillers for AI semiconductors, which is all about managing heat in AI data centers. So that's sort of the key piece, and people can study this if they wish later on, but you can see we've kind of color-coded different sort of high-level applications. As you mentioned earlier, there's a bit of pharma up here in the ultra gamma alumina powder that we make. That particular example, although very low volume, is extremely high in value. That particular example is a kind of a refining type centrifuge application in certain pharmaceutical applications for refining drugs. And so that's just one example where that one comes in. The aluminium nitrate product has three major applications. One is in battery, which we'll talk, there's some battery sort of applications. There's some CMP polishing applications, and also a smaller quantum there as a dopant in LED phosphors for specialty sort of applications for LED lighting. And those tend to be more sort of specific, like low UV or things like that.
Rob, before you move on from this slide, could you just reiterate? So I got the first of your IP was really the
Yep.
SX technology. What was the second key piece that you were
The
highlighting?
second key piece is this here, this HPA precursor precip. And what's sort of missing from this is another input that we don't call out, but there is actually another input that goes into here. Just use my chicken scratch. And that is a special compound that we make in-house, and it sort of is recycled, and it precipitates the particle into a special material that I can't tell you what it is, that when it dries, it produces a very unique crystalline morphology, which I know it's a bunch of fancy words, but basically when you look at it, it looks under a scanning electron microscope, it looks very different. And that is enabling some really unique properties for CMP polishing in semiconductors. And that's when we get to this ultra AAPD product over here, which is actually a liquid dispersion and at the nanoscale. So this is like a nano powder that's in a liquid, and so it looks like cream or milk. And that's the material that actually goes to CMP slurry manufacturers, which comes from this route. So that's the other key piece of IP is sitting in there, and so we don't disclose that as well. So all of this in general is our core IP. Other companies do this, or theoretically can do this, and a lot of them do produce gamma and alpha aluminas from an ATH precipitation. Some do, but they're usually doing it from a different chemistry base and not using nitric acid and ammonia like we do. So even that provides a different performance. And so one of the key unique properties of the business, of the technology, is that we've really unlocked the ability to use nitrate chemistry in the production of aluminas, which is the sort of the unlocking of that comes through that recycle loop with Orica, which is pretty important, and I think a significant endorsement of the technology from them, because Orica is a 100+ year business, conservative in their nature, and they obviously have a very deep understanding of our technology, and are very comfortable with us essentially making their AN for them, which in part we will be responsible for about 20% of their output.
Excellent. Thanks for the clarification.
And I suppose while we're on that, just in terms of sort of other cost drivers, what have you, Orica is, and just reagents more broadly, is probably about 25-30% of our cash cost. This Rio Tinto, the aluminium input cost, that's sort of typically about 4%. So the sensitivities around this is very different. We don't suffer much in the way of sort of cyclical highs and lows, so we're not sort of exposed to commodity cycles like other businesses might be. And even with respect to Orica and their price driver or underlying index is the ammonia index. And because of the way that deal's structured with them, we do pay them a fee, but it's sort of naturally hedged because of the input and then the output back to them.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
So I might just ask another question. I know you're still.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. We've got a little bit of time.
Now that we're on this slide and you've talked about Orica and Rio Tinto, is there any concentration or supply risk coming from these two companies?
Yeah. So with Rio, we'll use about 13,000 tons a year of that feedstock to make the 10,000 tons of product. Now, for scale, Rio Tinto, the Yarwun facility, which is the photo which was the image the facility that was in the image that I showed earlier, that's doing about 20,000 tons a day. So we're using 13,000 tons a year. And then down the road, you've got Queensland Alumina Limited, which is only about 20 minutes down the road. They're doing that much again. So that between the two sites is, I think, 3 to 4 million tons of alumina being produced that we could draw our measly little 13,000 tons from if we needed to. Now, if, God forbid, both those businesses shut down, as you can imagine, it's not a huge cost. It's like a small incremental cost to bring in 13,000 tons on an annual basis and store it. It really is not that big a deal, which is one of the beauties of this freight. And for us is not really a huge sensitivity because this is a low volume, high value, high margin business. The whole thinking around, if you're thinking of this company through a resources commodity lens, you're always going to come up with the wrong answer. So it's a really good question, Wei, because it's the value here is in the product and the pricing that we get for it. as opposed to chasing massive amounts of tonnage. Yeah.
Got it. And maybe just to follow up on that one, where does this put you on the cost curve?
Yeah, so the cost curve here is we again very difficult to speak to a cost curve because there's not a lot of published data around that because again it's not a commodity. But that said, we would be in some of the low, if not one of the lower cost producers. We're one of those rare scenarios where because of the technology, it's greener than everybody else, and it also happens to be cheaper to make than everybody else for the most part. So our closest competitors that are, and by competitors, I mean the businesses that we're already competing with in the market that are established, companies like Sumitomo Chemical or Nippon Light Metal, those guys are sort of in the mid-teens, so call it 12 to 15 US dollars a kilo cash cost. And as I said, we're about 7.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Heaps cheaper.
Yeah. But that,
I promise
again,
I'll let you move on from this slide. I just want to ask one last question.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which is, you mentioned before that in terms of the process of using nitrate to unlock the production for the aluminium before, that's a process which is more unique to yourselves, and there's others who have other processes behind that. Can you explain to us why that is so important?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways to do this. The sort of, I would call them the incumbents. Most of the incumbents, to make an equivalent type of 495, so 99.995% pure alumina, they're probably using a process called the alkoxide method, which is, so Sumitomo Chemical, for example, do this. And that process requires you to bring in a finished aluminium metal. So in other words, you're buying aluminium on the LME at the LME price. You then need to pay a premium for there's a geography premium, but there's also a high purity premium. So if you want the super high purity aluminium metal, that's another 500 US dollars a ton nominally on top of whatever the LME price is. And then you take that metal and you actually use alcohol to back dissolve it through the alkoxide chemistry process into an ATH material. And that hydroxide then can be filtered and then dried and calcined into these alumina products down here. Now, that process has a lot of expense attached to it because, first of all, you're buying the feedstock is very, very expensive compared to what it is for ours. It's subject to cyclical swings, and those trends or those cycles or the price variation in the feedstock you can't pass on to your customer. That those prices that you negotiate with your customer is from a customer's side, they're not interested in what your raw material variation cost might be. It's you agree on a price and that's the way it goes. So depending on where the aluminium price is, sometimes you're making good money, other times you could be upside down. So it just depends on what's going on with that market. So that's typically how those guys do it. There are other technologies, probably the most other dominant technology that does get a little bit of airplay, particularly here on some smaller HPA businesses that are looking to, startups, if you will. They're using hydrochloric acid as the leaching material that makes a type of alumina chloride hexahydrate material, and then that gets calcined. That is the challenge with that is, of course, it's hydrochloric acid, which the minute you start playing with that, the materials of construction for the plant and the maintenance costs just go through the roof. When you're drying or calcining material that's got residual chlorides in it, it just gets destroyed by the chlorides. So there is some queries around whether those types of technologies are really truly commercial. I think they have been commercialized in some regards in the past, but a lot of those companies or those technologies have since been shut down because they just didn't seem to make any sense. So yeah, I guess everybody's having a crack and good luck to them, but that's our take on this stuff. Yeah.
Excellent. I'll let you go on with the presentation.
No, all good, mate. Anytime. Okay. So yeah, just a quick snapshot of where we, the different sort of verticals where we have an advantage. And I think the point of this slide is that we are focused on the markets where our technology is giving us a technological advantage over other markets or over other producers. Anybody that does a little bit of research into HPA more broadly will see that there's a huge market and production capability within China, but that market and the vast majority of that product is being produced for sapphire production for LED technology. LEDs are essentially types of semiconductors. They're not advanced node. They're just semiconductors that are built on sapphire wafers instead of silicon wafers. And that is essentially that is one market in the HPA market that's sort of semi-commodified. And we are not competing in that market. We don't intend to sell our HPA to produce synthetic sapphire. Our HPAs are going into markets where we have a genuine technological advantage, and that falls into these sort of, at a high level, these three big verticals of semiconductors, direct lithium extraction, and battery or lithium-ion battery. We've also noted that there is a sort of a smaller sliver there or biotech as well, but those volumes are a lot smaller. And in each case, these sort of sub-verticals, the thermal filler, which I'll talk a bit about all the detail of that, but that's all about our technology is unlocking the adoption of high purity alumina as a thermal heat sink for advanced node semiconductors for AI. So that's a key thing that's been a challenge in that technology to be able to increase the power, the wattage through AI accelerators. And the limitation there has been the ability to extract the heat away when you do that, because historically it's been a silica-based thermal filler. And so by adopting HPA into this, you increase your thermal conductivity by 2 to 3 times, and therefore can run more power through the semi and create more compute for the watts of energy. The other application is CMP, which stands for chemical mechanical planarization. This is used at various stages in the production of a semiconductor. There are two sort of key pieces. There's, our alumina is typically used for harder to polish substrates and materials, like silicon carbide for high power semis, but also for what they call carbon masking and other applications that sit within the advanced node packaging production process. And our technology has some unique properties that is affording 50% higher removal rate, which means they get more yield. We also have very low levels of sodium, potassium, and lithium, which are also metals that they don't want in that CMP process. CMP is an extraordinarily technical technology that is key and critical to the semiconductor fabrication process. And these guys are like atomic scientists, really. They're looking at an atom by atom basis as to what's going on when they're doing this work. And so consistency is of utmost importance when you're working with these guys, and we have a substantial volume working with we're working with all the big players in this regard. There's also a little bit on
the CMP side, that's something that's already kind of like proven and you can sell into that market already.
Yeah, there is already companies that, there is an adoption of alumina in CMP already. It already exists. And so what we're rolling up to these guys and saying, hey, we'll try ours because it'll shoot the lights out for you. And so that's how those conversations tend to go. But because of the nature of the semi market and there's a deep technical qualification they have to go through, because they're not just looking at the basics. They're looking at, well, what else is present in your material that could have upset the apple cart in the process? And so they're looking at like ppm or ppb levels of certain things to ensure that doesn't happen. And so that takes a little bit of time. But once you're in, the stickiness of this and the inelasticity of the pricing is really, really strong. And then the semi-tooling, I've got a little bit more detail. I can get into this later as well. DLE solvents is a whole other market that is a different this is a much higher volume type market, but again, it's where our process is producing this, what we call here, this unique amorphous ATH, which dramatically improves the absorption of lithium from a DLE geothermal brine. And so there's a little bit in that's quite interesting. And then finally, various applications for aluminium nitrates and other materials for coatings and other types of applications within the lithium battery sector. So they're the big ones. And as I mentioned earlier, there's some biotech for ceramic, essentially joints for hip replacement, knee replacement type joints. And there's also dental. And then there's also the sort of filtration type purification materials as well for pharma. I won't spend too much time on this chart. There's a lot going on with it, but this is really just sort of I think everybody understands that there's an enormous amount of money being spent on the AI boom. I think the takeaway here is that, you mentioned the picks and shovels earlier, Way, and we are very much on that side of it with what we do. Our material is required. Say what you will about where AI goes and how it's ultimately deployed to us as humans, but these companies that you see listed here and others that are not even there on that list, because this thing gets so outdated so quickly at the moment, they're spending trillions of dollars. Like the last number we saw from JP Morgan was sort of over $5 trillion now is where that number's at. And you can see here, this was McKinsey data that was like 1.7 trillion to 2027. Now it's 5 plus to 2030. So point being is we're on the supply side of this capex, right? And that's the story here.
Yeah, and early stage too, right? I mean, it's not something which needs to be more late cycle, but
yeah, exactly right. Yeah, we're literally, our material is going at the chip level. So this is a really simple slide that sort of gives you a sense of as it relates to the semiconductor sector, where does our material sit in the supply chain? And you can see here for the alpha alumina materials for packaging, we provide a raw material to spherical alumina manufacturers. So these are our customers here. I can't tell you who they are, but they are then supplying semiconductor packaging manufacturers who then supply to the actual integrated device manufacturers like TSMC, SK Hynix, Samsung, Micron, etc. Companies that sit in this category in the middle here, like essentially our customer's customer, some of the biggest companies that maybe you may have never heard of, but they're companies like Resonac, Namex, Nagase, Sumitomo Bakelite. They're all companies that are embedded in the semiconductor supply chain for decades. And if you look at some of the stock prices for those businesses in Japan, there are all of them are listed on Japan and of course the Korean stock exchange. They've gone pretty well in the last sort of 12 to 18 months as a result of this boom. Then there's this sort of impregnated circuit board stuff, which is actually another application for the thermal filler. So circuit boards, or PCB as it's known, has a filler in it that's typically silica. Again, for what we refer to as the advanced package that TSMC produce. Then now, again, how can we get the heat away? And just to give you a sense of scale, go back 2 or 3 years or 4 years, a typical AI GPU was maybe drawing 300 watts of power per GPU, right? And the GPU looks about the size of a shoebox or 2 shoeboxes or something like that, around about. Now they're wanting to get to over 1,000 watts. That's like a space heater for your bathroom, right? Like there is a significant amount of power they're trying to put through these, and that creates a lot of heat. And so now they're looking at every aspect of the package, as they refer to it, to where they can improve the heat conductivity. Silicon's been the stalwart of this because it's non-reactive, it does conduct a bit of heat, it's mechanically stable, and most importantly, it has no alpha radiation, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so finding an alternative, better thermal conductivity material that has no alpha radiation was the challenge, and that's where we come in. Then there's a whole bunch of applications here around that we're still working through in terms of actual equipment manufacturers. So this is like, ASML and Lam Research and Applied Materials, all those guys that make the equipment that then TSMC and Intel and all those guys actually use in their fabs to make it. So there's various ceramic applications in those equipments that we're also working with some companies on. Did you have a question, Mike?
Oh yeah, I was just going to ask, on the topic of thermal fillers, how does this compare to, other cooling technologies? Are they substitutes for each other, like, water cooling and stuff like that, or are they complementary?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just jump forward to this slide because that explains this one perfectly. So this is a really simple kind of diagram to try to lay that out. And so what you've got in the middle picture here, that's actually a Blackwell B200 Nvidia GPU, right? That goes into a server rack in an AI data center. And on that, you can see a couple of these blue boxes. Each one of those, that blue box essentially is what is referred to as the advanced package that TSMC would produce for Nvidia. And at a schematic level, that advanced package has various pieces and components to it. The CPU here, or /GPU, that's the Nvidia design chip. This is the high bandwidth memory, which is made by SK Hynix, Samsung, Micron. And that's the high bandwidth memory of these gold plates. And then that's the GPU in the middle, the purpley looking stuff. And then all of that is encapsulated in a epoxy molding compound. And that epoxy molding compound is about 90% by weight a thermal filler, which looks like that under a microscope. So those are like 1 to 2 micron size spheres of alumina. And they sit literally at the chip level. So that's sitting on there. And then they are the thing that transfers the heat out to a heat sink. And then the heat sink is linked to air or water cooling. So, which is like the data center level cooling infrastructure. So it's complementary to, and it all starts with what you encapsulate the chip with is what your limiting rate of heat extraction is going to be. You can't, so whether you're using water cooling or air cooling, that's fine. That has its own benefits, but you have to encapsulate the chip first so that it doesn't get short-circuited or contaminated with dust and other crap. So that's basically what's going on here. So that's how this kind of works. So the heat comes out of this, and then that heat is drawn out by the infrastructure of the cooling system in the data center.
Okay, makes sense. And
yeah,
how
so
does, just quickly, how does HPA as a filler compare to other materials?
Yeah, so what we've come to understand is that whilst there are lots of, I mean, anybody can use Claude or ChatGPT can go, well, what's the thermal conductivity of aluminium nitride or silicon nitride compared to HPA or compared to silica? And yeah, aluminium nitride has a much higher thermal conductivity, but in these applications, it's disqualified because the nitride will react with the resins that encapsulate the material. And so when that happens, it makes it unusable. There are also other properties of HPA that those other materials don't necessarily quite work for in terms of, its mechanical elasticity and other things like that. And so, yeah, if you will, the trade-off study has been conducted by the semiconductor manufacturers, and they've landed on HPA as the next material to replace silica. And that's, when I say next, it's already being replaced. It's in the adoption process right now, and we are supplying small volumes out of stage 1 because it's not a huge facility, but we are supplying small volumes in stage 1 already into that supply chain that's sort of qualified and back to the supply chain. So those volumes will just grow as we ramp up and as they ramp up with us.
And so is the use of HPA versus silica a relatively recent development or something that's happened for some time?
It's been, in terms of this application for what are called advanced node semiconductors, it's recent, and it's been driven by the power demand, right, that I was talking about earlier. So this, the intersection of the compute requirement and the power with our ability to supply that sort of happens to have just worked out perfectly for us. There has been other applications or are other applications for HPA and other things, but it's a lower grade where it's not being used in this particular type of package. So the advanced package, as they call it, which is done by TSMC, those specific sort of specifications that they call for, which is this concept of what's called low alpha. And I know it's very confusing because it's a different type of alpha, but that material, or the material that you supply into that, has to be low alpha radiation, and that brings into it a whole bunch of other challenges for material manufacturers, which is what we're able to solve for. So while I'm on that, forgive the physics lesson here, guys, but this is a chart here that it was actually put together by Honeywell a while ago. And what this is basically saying, as the advanced node, so people may have heard the concept of a node, so the number, which is the size, it originally started out as the gate size of the transistor, 45 nanometer gate size. It's now just more of a marketing term, but anything sort of in that less than 7 nanometer, even 3 nanometer package requires what's called super ultra low alpha radiation specification. This stands for counts per hour per centimeter squared of radiation. So it's kind of like a Geiger counter, right? And so our material, because we can achieve less than 1 part per billion of uranium and thorium, which is the two materials that decay and emit that alpha radiation, because we can deliver that quality, our material sits right down here in the blue. And we've had this count done for our material, and we're sort of at 0.0005 or something like that. It's very low. Our next closest competitor that is in business is, which the other Japanese manufacturers I mentioned, they actually can't get to this level. And in fact, one of our customers was trying to develop their own capability to do this, and they've given up and come to us, which is actually pretty cool.
Is that why you've seen that demand come through from the Japanese guys over the last quarter or so? Or
some of it is, yeah. And in fact, that particular company put a toehold on the material while they're working through it and qualifying it. And so, yeah, that certainly, there's a sort of a early adopter group that we started talking to even in late 2023. And then we're getting to that point where the bigger guys and the later adopters that have been sitting on the sidelines watching the adoption of this unfold, and now they're coming to us and going, yeah, we want this, we want to fast track the qualification. And that's certainly what some of those volumes that were announced in a couple of weeks ago are in that.
Excellent.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information here, but I think that's the core piece. The alpha radiation is a key requirement that you have to be able to meet in order to provide any material that's within a 3 or 4 centimeter radius of this advanced package. So even these interposers here, all this interposer here, for example, is silicon at the moment. I just came back from Taiwan last week. There is talk of them even changing this to a different material, which could end up being an alumina-based material. We're not sure yet. This substrate that I mentioned before, which is a PCB, this has currently got silica in it. That could also become alumina. So there's quite a bit of upside in terms of where alumina starts to replace or substitute out silicon in this particular advanced package application. But it's still a bit early for those two applications. Still a little bit early.
And for these are all effectively thermal filler applications that we're looking at.
Of different types, yeah. And so they all have slightly different specifications around the sizing or what have you, but they tend to be around that 1 to 2 micron size. And the reason they want the different sizing is because if you think about different size bean balls, beanbag balls or whatever, they can actually compact in better and have a higher bulk density. So that's the idea of it.
And just to round out on the semi side, you did mention there's 3 uses: CMP, thermal fillers, and the semi tooling side.
Yeah.
Just to understand the demand profile of each of those, are you able to give a sense?
Yeah. So this is the demand sort of profile that we see in terms of the thermal filler application at the moment. And in fact, this chart here on the right is some UBS numbers that were put together in December 2025. And we are definitely seeing the high side case starting to emerge by 2030. This was a very conservative view I took in October of last year after going to Semicon West in Arizona and working through the sort of a ground up model that we put together with a little bit of Macquarie research in terms of the CAGR number. But that CAGR number is probably understated. And I think the CAGR for this was 35% for data center growth, which I think is now being eclipsed. That just goes to show how quickly things change. But this volume here, I think, is very much looking like it's coming into the fray. And so which is partly why we're also speaking to a stage 3 and how we're starting to examine the concept of a stage 3 facility as well, just to continue to drive to fill the market. This slide, just real quick, was why alpha particles or alpha emissions matter. It causes bit flips in the chip. A bit flip is like an error on the chip. When you have low alpha materials, you get maybe 4 bit flips an hour. If you don't, you get 101. This is actually a simulation, a computer simulation showing it. It's just a screenshot of the finished result of the simulation that we ran, and so you can see that's an unacceptable number of bit flips, which I know we're all huge fans of not having bit flips in our chips. So CMP, just quickly on this one, this is sort of a simple diagram of what CMP actually does. It's, first of all, you polish the semiconductor wafer itself flat. There's certain patterning that they might do through the CMP process. But the way the process actually works is you have a slurry, which is a white sort of milking substance which has like small nanoparticles in it, which is the abrasive material. The slurry then consists of the abrasive plus some chemical oxidation materials. It spins around. You have a carrier that holds the wafer, which is there. You apply an amount of pressure and it just polishes it, right? And when you use our material compared to other people's industry standard aluminas, they get a 50% improvement in removal rate, which improves the yield. But also, really interestingly, with our product, you also get this really clever selectivity. And so selectivity is demonstrated here in this example, this diagram over here, where you might have floated in through chemical vapor deposition a new metal. This could be copper, for example. You want to wear away the copper, but leave behind the dielectric as well. So how you machine that off using CMP, but not damage the material that had already placed there and set for that particular height. And this is sort of, the levels we're talking about here is like angstroms in terms of thickness. It's tiny sort of atoms that we're looking at here. And so that's how that process works. This market's probably another couple of thousand tons for us at the moment, and I think it will grow as well. And yeah, this is actually what that material looks like. We've just installed this machine in our stage 1 facility that enables us to make these nano-alumina particles that stay in suspension in the product. So we actually ship a DI, stands for deionized water, that is then suspended in it, so it looks like that milky material. Quick little bit, I'm just checking time, so just a quick little bit on this. This is some of the areas that are kind of growth areas that we're looking at, various applications within the manufacturing of the equipment, but also the silicon interposer, like I said, that may be substituted out. There's other parts and pieces, the package substrate and so on, where I think they're looking at anywhere they can help the flow of heat exit the package is the key. We also mentioned in that announcement a couple of weeks ago about a 5,000 tonne LOI, letter of intent, for a battery application for lithium-ion batteries. We can't speak to the specifics of that anymore. It's been they're tightened up our sort of disclosure, requirements, as in the customer has. They don't want to signal to their competitors what they're doing, but historically, these are some of the applications that our aluminium nitrate product and our other materials have been used for different types of coating applications for a lithium-ion battery. And this technology that we have is unlocking the ability to do, for example, anode coating, because of the quality of what we produce. It doesn't interfere with the chemistry. And so it's improving the thermal stability of the battery, making it safer so it doesn't catch fire, but also giving higher power output and so on. And so that application that we mentioned in that announcement of 5,000 tonnes, we believe is for a kind of an LFP based battery, as opposed to in the past when we were working with these guys, it's been 4 years of work we've done with them. In the past, it was more of what you would call a high nickel NMC, NMCA battery chemistry. But for those that follow the battery market a little bit, you would know that technology is becoming less popular, and the LFP is very much caught up or catching up to the power capabilities of the old NMC and NMCA tech. But with the benefit of LFP being a little bit safer as well than the NMC.
But I guess your point being that this is on the anode side of the battery, so it doesn't really matter what the battery chemistry is. It's something that you can pull into on the demand. Is that the right way to understand it?
Oh, look, I can't fully answer that question from an NDA point of view, but what I would say is that anodes aren't anodes necessarily. Like, they are going to be different for an NMC. I mean, they're still natural or synthetic graphite, to your point, I guess, but at that level. But the chemistry and the way what they do with them are a little bit different, yeah. Because what you might see in a benefit in one type of chemistry, it might not translate to a similar benefit in an NMC. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest that our material and where it ends up would also end up in an NMCA or NMC battery. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Okay, no, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. You did mention, I'm conscious of time at the moment, so I'm not sure if there were any kind of like key messages. We might just leave a few minutes for Q&A.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is just really gives you a bit of the summary of the pricing. I've already mentioned we're average sales price of about $29, but you'll see that CMP product, the nano-alumina product, is a $48 a kilo product for us. There's a little bit more work that goes into it, but it's still very high margin. So yeah, that's sort of what this is. We use agents a lot of the case. There's a very technical people that helps us with the sales team. We've got quite a substantial sales team here in Australia that we do a lot of travel, and obviously I chime in as I can as well. So yeah, that's sort of a little bit about the marketing. This just talks to where we're at with LOIs and so on. So I won't go into too much detail there, but the key message is that we're 118% subscribed now for LOIs for the 10,000 ton plant. And we're slowly moving through contract negotiations as well for binding agreements. Again, for people that are new to the story, this is the high level metrics. It's a sort of, $300 million EBITDA business in Aussie dollar terms, and ramping up in towards the end of 2027, 2028, and high margin. And so I think if you look at our market cap, as you said, right now we're probably 3 to 4x EBITDA for the future, which I think signals a pretty significant buying opportunity. And this is just a little bit of a snapshot of current progress as well, just a different angle of the plant and the government support that we have from NAIF and EFA, and of course the NRF. They came in for 75 million with about nearly 7%, and some government grants there as well. So I'll stop there, and we can do a bit of Q&A if you like.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. As a reminder for people who are online, if you do have questions, you can use the Q&A box, or you can use the raise hand function. Rob, you've spent quite a lot of time talking about the HPA side of the business. I've noticed that you've also got something called Alpha Sapphire. Can you talk a bit about that and what that is?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, I had to put a slide in for that, but there's a little bit of a backstory to that. I won't bore you too much with the detail, but needless to say, we initially entered into that market with a view. It's a natural downstream step. If there is a place for that market that supports a non-China produced sapphire, right? So we went into that initially. We bought two sapphire production machines that are with a new technology that were designed to make an 8-inch wafer for micro LED technology. That Apple was sort of ultimately the big cheese behind that. Now Apple were planning to do that for the Apple Watch Ultra, but the Ultra 2 actually was when they were going to roll it out. They yanked that. Osram was the sort of significantly impacted by that. If you look at Osram's share price, which is an Austrian-based business, you can see where that happened. but they never mentioned Apple because it was all under NDA. So in the meantime, we pivoted. So we were going to supply into that market. That was the plan, because Apple were insisting on an ex-China, blah, blah, blah. We, in the meantime, have pivoted into a couple of other areas, and we're in qualification with our 8-inch wafers, which is that image on the last slide. I've taken it down now, but our 8-inch wafers for what's called GaN on sapphire power semis. So we're actually working with a couple of fabs that make GaN, stands for gallium nitride, on sapphire wafer substrate. That is a technology that for power semiconductors. Power semiconductors are basically, think of them as chips or transistors that control power, and they've enabled miniaturization of power controllers. So a really simple example would be, anybody's noticed how the size of their iPhone charger has gone from being something the size of a big stone to actually something quite small. That is directly related to the miniaturization of power semiconductors. But also power semis are at a larger, higher end version of them for controlling power in EVs, for battery power pack management, for fast chargers, and now, surprise, AI data centers for controlling the power in AI data centers. So we are in that particular industry, or that market. We're directly engaged with semi-fab companies for that application. Why it is, again, that's the risk here is around China, but because there's a strategic element to that particular technology, there's a reluctance to want to source those wafers because there's a lot of IP in the wafer spec. So we have some protection around how that's structured. So that business is sort of, we've deployed about $3 million in capital into that business for these two machines. And we're just running through qualification. It takes a long time, as you can imagine. And we expect at some stage these companies will seek to want a larger volume, and then we'll be using that volume to underpin a sort of a project financing for a slight expansion of that. And that'll be a small thing if it happens, because the volumes are lower, but it is a good margin. So that's what the Alpha Sapphire business is about. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And one of the other strategic benefits of it for us is it does give us additional credibility in the semi market more broadly. We're engaged directly with the fabs, and every time you work with these guys, you're learning something new every day, and it's obviously very, very important in what we do.
Okay. So right now HPA's or Alpha's going through first project, and we've seen announcements regarding stage 1 and stage 2, and you mentioned stage 3 before. Can you explain what these different stages are?
Yeah. So stage 1 it's kind of a loss leader. It is a full-time operational facility, like it's running 24/7, and it's producing about 350 tons of our aluminium nitrate product, and we're unlocking more capability out of it, which it'll do about 60 to 100 tons of aluminas. And so that is critical to be able to get yourself qualified into those markets that we've been talking about. If you don't have the capacity to produce that kind of tonnage, it is very difficult. They're never just going to accept, a few kilos to approve your process. So we have a couple of binding agreements already now supplying out of stage 1 for both. One is going into the TSMC supply chain through a Japanese customer, and that's pretty important, and that will grow. And the other one is through high bandwidth memory, which is also for the other key component in that advanced package that we were talking about. And so there's a whole bunch of other LOIs that we have that are also for those precise applications that are building, and you have to have the ability to say, yeah, here's 1 ton, here's 3 or 4 tons, so they can do large scale product runs to ensure that you can meet the requirements consistently. And so that's what stage 1's main purpose is. And I think without it, we wouldn't be talking, to be honest with you. I think we wouldn't have a credible story to be able to tell our customers, for one. And then, of course, stage 2 is really the commercialization of that, right? So that's when the revenue really starts to flow. We are expecting, we'll probably do close to $1 million in revenue from stage 1 this year. Coming up for the next year, we'll probably do double that, but we'll see. And so that's how that kind of works. But stage 2 is really when the actual profitability comes in and the rubber hits the road. Sorry, stage 2, and then stage 3 is really just a replica of stage 2 in many regards, but probably just focused on the thermal filler application.
Perfect. I know we're running short on time, so I might just ask one last one, which is, you did mention before you just got back from Taiwan, I believe.
Yes.
Any feedback or color that you can give in terms of stakeholders or people in the market on their views offshore versus the conversations that you're having in Australia? Yeah,
well, I think I could probably expand that out to Hong Kong as well, because we were in Hong Kong, both Rob Lord and I, for a UBS conference as well. But in Taiwan, I probably had close to a dozen customer meetings in and around a government thing I was also doing with the US government, Taiwanese government, Australian government. And the energy in Taiwan and Taipei and the gravitas around TSMC is unbelievable. And all of the customers are connected into what's actually happening. What is the next thing? And that's where some of that sort of things, those bits of information I mentioned earlier about where they're looking to extract more heat, how they can improve the performance of the advanced package. That is the entire focus of everybody within the supply chain in Taiwan. And a lot of the suppliers into Taiwan for those applications are, guess what, in Japan and Korea, which is where most of our customers are. So obviously it's just, again, reinforcing that we're working through the correct supply chain. I think that we'll get some additional business directly through Taiwan as well that won't cannibalize that. And so, yeah, that probably would be the high level thing from Taiwan. in Hong Kong, just the broader sort of thinking around how, what are the sort of stocks that they were thinking about, people thinking about that are those picks and shovels that are actually there. And obviously there was just a general view around that we certainly sit in one of those things. Because again, if you look at companies like Resonac, Samsung, SDI, etc., their stock prices have gone bananas. And of course, if you're supplying into that, what do you think is going to happen? And so for us, it's just creating the awareness in the Australian market where some of those names I just mentioned would just for some people just goes over their head. They've just not heard of them. And so, but when you start talking about those people that we're in the supply chain with in other markets, as in share markets, then it's like, oh, that's quite interesting. So yeah, we're pretty pumped about all that, and once things start to flow, I'm sure that hopefully the stock price will be reflected. But we're trying to bring that, educate the market a little bit here in Australia.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I've certainly learned a lot today, Rob. So thank you for all your time.
No problem.
And yeah, I mean, we've run through the time. I've still got so many questions, but thankfully we do have another webinar which we are conducting next Monday afternoon, 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And joining us will also be a semiconductor expert, Yantor Boone. So we look forward to that. And I think we can probably continue some of the conversation there.
Great. Thanks, Wei, and nice to meet everybody. Thanks for your time.